So welcome everyone to our award presentation event for our Collections Trust Award. And that's not a typo, it is the 2022 awards, even though it is 2023. It is a bit confusing for myself included, but it is the 2022 award. I'm joined by Louise Turner, one of our trustees who was on the judging panel for the award. So Louise and myself are going to guide you through the event today. So feel free if you do have any comments or questions to pop them in the chat. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to Louise, who's going to talk you through the theme, the applicants and our shortlist, and then we'll be hearing 4 presentations before we actually announce the winner just before 5 o'clock. So over to Louise.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Collections Trust Award 2022. We're delighted to have you all on the Zoom this afternoon. The Collections Trust Award highlights the often unsung achievements of those who have managed the collections that lie at the heart of all museums. And this year, Collections Trusts would like to celebrate recent collections-based work relating to our Rethinking cataloguing campaign and the changes within the standard spectrum. It was an incredibly tough decision, as all the submissions were worthy of note, and we really appreciate the number of hours that go into any form of collections management project. However, the judges were particularly interested in collections management activities that have put the new spectrum principles into practice by encouraging an inclusive approach that not only increases access to collections information, but results in new perspectives and ethical approaches within catalogue records. And here we have the applicants. It's a really impressive list. And from this list, we are going to hear from the 4 people who we've shortlisted. So we've obviously got Museums and Galleries Edinburgh, Powell-Cotton Museum, Sainsbury Centre, and Bethlem Museum of the Mind. And I will hand over to Nico Tayak to kick us off, please.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for shortlisting the Old Reekie Retold project. My team and myself are delighted about that, so that's great news. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Old Reekie Retold project was and the various different elements of it. It was a 3-year collections project. It really is summarised by this image here, which if any of you have been following the project, you would have seen this image. The project's now finished, so you won't see this image anymore. You'll be delighted to know. But it encapsulates the sort of the feeling of the project, really, and this sort of feeling of mystery about what's in our collections, to a certain extent, enlightenment, and people at the heart of what's going on. And really what it was trying to do was bring together our collections, so the history and art of Edinburgh, with the stories that the collections can tell us, and embedding that firmly within the people of Edinburgh and people who can tell us about the collections. We had 2 broad aims of the project. One of them was improving how we look after our collections, both in terms of the collections information and also an awful lot of repacking and digitisation. But we also wanted to get people involved and really celebrate the shared ownership of the collections. I should have said we're a local authority, we're Edinburgh Council Museum Service. So we're very clear about the fact that we don't own the collections, it's the people of Edinburgh who own the collections. And it's, the project was really trying to celebrate that and bring the perspectives of the people of Edinburgh into our collections. So what exactly were the smaller objectives of the project? Well, we undertook an inventory to establish the full scope of the collection. Like many of you, we don't know everything we have in our collections, and I spend a lot of time explaining to people that's fairly standard for museums, but we wanted to find out exactly what we had. So we were reviewing the collections records on our collections management system. We use KeyEmu to ensure that there's a consistency. So we really kind of worked very hard on the cataloguing procedure and made sure that we had very, very tight definitions about how we used the various different fields. And we were really kind of trying to maximize possible retrievability of records for a public end user. So we started our own tagging system using a thesaurus based on the old social history and industrial classification that I'm sure some of you will know. We decided that that's not the most accessible for the end user, so we kind of translate it into plain English, which I think has worked. We've made participation a key part of the project, and we recognise that a lot of collections reviews and inventory projects are quite internal. There's not that much engagement going on with these projects, which we thought was a missed opportunity to actually really consult with people around us and get their perspective on what we have in the collections. So within that, we developed a process to capture contributed context and perspectives, which I'll talk about later on. And on top of that, we were in the midst of the COVID pandemic. So we were actually spending 15 months of the project away working from home. So we developed all sorts of new ways to actually showcase the project's findings by doing various bits of filming and podcasts. Here we go. So inventory, consistency and retrievability, subject tagging, participation, and then the story catching and sharing what we found. In terms of the engagement of the project, as I mentioned, we were in lockdown for a lot of it, so we had to turn to, like many of you, digital media to produce film. We dabbled a bit with podcasts, we did some online talks, we did an online exhibition, and it culminated in December 2022, just last December, with an actual exhibition at the City Arts Centre, which you can see the photo of there. So we used a wide range of media to showcase the findings, and it was really interesting to actually see the ways different types of collections and different stories lended themselves to different media. So whether something was better for a blog or a film. We made 2 films inspired by recipes in our collection. So we had my colleagues Vicky and Oliver down here making recipes from the collections, which you can see on YouTube. It was a huge project. It was 3 years. We had 3 fixed-term contract collections assistants on it, as well as all our history and applied art curators. And as the project developed, we kind of explored various different opportunities to try out new things. The team had a really great attitude for just trying things out. So, for example, the podcasts and the films, to a certain extent, none of us had any previous knowledge about making these things, but we just thought we'd give it a go, which is a big, strong legacy of the project. We really hope to continue that going. Now, I mentioned the idea about the story catching, which was quite a naff term, maybe, but we figured actually it says exactly what it is. Getting people who have a lived experience of our collections and bringing them in and spending time with them, and letting them just free fall, tell us what they want to tell us about the collections, about the particular object. From our point of view, it was quite targeted. So we had specific questions, specific items we wanted to know more about. And so in the images here on the top left, we had a collection of images, photographs, which we really knew nothing about. And through social media, we actually got in touch with the descendants of some of the people in the photos, and they came in and they'd been doing a lot of family history. So what we had really tied up very nicely with what they were researching, and various other projects on the go, and other opportunities to meet people who could tell us about objects. And some of these 2 photos here you can see of objects on display. So they ended up actually going into the Old Reekie Retold exhibition, which was a really great way to actually show the results of story catching. We developed a way of actually recording the findings of story catching. So this is a screenshot from our KeyEmu collections management system, and you can see the sort of uploaded documents, and it's really raw data. We haven't done any editing, so we've got a verbatim recording of the meeting and curator's notes that the curator was taking during the meetings. And then there's an image of the photographs that we were working on as well. So it's pretty raw data. So as it is, it wouldn't be ready to go out and be shared, but it's that information which will and already has started to inform, future exhibitions, future research, and really kind of heighten what we know a lot about the objects in the collection. We use event records on EMU to include structured data, such as the dates and the organisers and contact details. So part of this is actually revising our consent and consent forms, and making sure that people who contribute this information understand that we're keeping their details on record, and we're actually getting their permission to contact them in future years as and when we need to. Another screenshot here to show you an object record which has been stored, which had story catching done to it, if you like. And you can see the 2 little icons, the green kind of, I think it represents a gallery, and the blue book icon, which are little visual flags for users on EMU to see that a catalogue record, an object record, has some information attached to it. So it's an immediate visual thing that curators can see, this record, there's more information, and they'll know where to go to it. In terms of the legacy of the project, we've got a much stronger, resilient and confident collections management system. We've got a much tighter procedures to ensure consistency, clarity, relevance and accessibility in how we record the collections and how we use the collections. So throughout the project, whenever we used an object in our events, in the exhibitions, we would record that. And that was a trial during the project. And that's definitely something that we are keeping going and developing and being much more clear about being able to record every single use of collections. Cataloguing has been standardized, both in the events module, which is the use of collections, and in the catalogue, but also in another sort of free-form part of the EMU. And we have structured metadata, which gives us confidence to know where our information has actually come from, whether it's been internal research or contributed from externally. We have our revised subject thesaurus, which makes our collections much more accessible. At the moment, our records aren't available online, but the idea is one day they will be. And this tagging that we've been working on is future-proofing that, so we don't have to go and rewrite our entire thesaurus. It's already done. And the project team had some great fun just learning new skills. So as a team, we're much more resilient in terms of photography, digitization, filmmaking. And lastly, the social impacts on local audiences has been really, really satisfying. Throughout the project, we're doing evaluation with during COVID, sadly, we didn't do as many events as we had wanted to, but the small amount of evaluation we did showed that people were really kind of getting a lot out of it. And really the culmination of the project was the exhibition, which ran for 2 months. And that showcased highlight objects and highlight stories. And it was a fantastic thing to see visitors talking to other visitors they didn't know, reminiscing with objects. We were trialing various different things in the exhibition. We were trialing QR codes to show people, to send people to the films and podcasts and blogs that we've been doing during the project. And people were scanning them. And the comments really show that people really valued the local nature of the project, and they really valued the celebration of shared ownership, which was hugely satisfying because that's what we set out to do. So we were quite pleased with that. And finally, one of the elements we did in the exhibition was a poetry competition, which you can see on our website. And some of the winning entries are incredibly moving because they really showed the power that objects can have in getting an emotional response out of people, which is a really lovely way to round off 3 years of quite a massive and quite difficult project in quite challenging times, let's say. So some of the poems are really very moving and a fantastic way to round off the project. So that, in a nutshell, is Old Reekie Retold. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Nico. And there's some contact information there as well, if you want to do a bit more about the project. So our next speaker, our next applicant is Powell-Cotton Museum. So I'm now going to welcome Kathleen Lawther, who's going to present on their behalf.
Thank you. So my name is Kathleen. I am a freelance curator who was working with the Powell-Cotton Museum for this project, but I'm going to begin with a bit of context about the Powell-Cotton Museum. It was founded by Percy Powell-Cotton, who was a big game hunter, and it houses his collections and those of his family, including his daughters, Diana and Antoinette, who were anthropologists. And the museum was run by the family up until Percy's youngest son, Christopher, who was running the museum when he died in 2006. But many of the collections, which date from the late 19th and to early 20th centuries, were collected in parts of Africa and Asia. And although the family were not directly involved in colonial administration, their wealth and their social position allowed them access and opportunity to travel and collect in these countries. So the museum has historically told the story of Percy Powell-Cotton as a heroic hunter. And now they're working on reimagining how they can present the museum and its collections. And one of the ways they're doing that is by sharing more of the stories of the other individuals who were instrumental in enabling Percy and his family to collect. In so doing, they're decentering the Powell-Cotton family and concentrating on what makes their collections meaningful to people today. So they've been beginning to do this through some social media posts and displays focusing on the idea of museum makers. And where I come in is that I wanted to work with them to ensure that this practice was being embedded in the way they document their collections going forward. So when planning the project, we chose to look at photographs because both Percy and Diana Powell-Cotton took hundreds of photographs on their collecting trips. and recorded information about the people in them, many of whom were the guides and interpreters and hunters they were working with, as well as the people from whom they purchased objects. The main focus for my project was a collection of over 700 photographs taken in southern Somalia in the 1930s by Diana Powell-Cotton. And I've chosen to use a picture of one of her closed photograph albums here to kind of demonstrate that at the beginning of the project, the museum's photographic archives were a closed book. They had been catalogued at group level by the archivist, Hazel Basford, and they could be seen by researchers on site, but only very few of them had been digitised. And yet the museum had found that people were very interested in those that had been digitised and shared, so they wanted to capitalise on this interest. So I worked with the then head of collections in Livni and curator Rachel Jennings to put together a project to research and catalogue these photographs, thinking about how we could respectfully record information about the people connected to and depicted in the collections, and how we could catalogue the collections in a way that centres the needs of people, particularly people from Somali and Somali diaspora backgrounds. And I successfully applied to the Art Fund for a Headley Fellowship grant, which funded this work. So the core of this was thinking about who we are cataloguing for, which is to say, who is interested in these photographs? How can we describe them in ways which make them findable for those people? And how can we record the meanings that matter? So in thinking about our audiences, we knew that it was not a case of there being one homogenous Somali community, but we focused on three specific groups. One was direct descendants of some of the people in the photographs, who were Bajuni people now living in Kenya, Somali diaspora communities in East London, and this was because the museum is located in Birchington, a village in Kent. The area is predominantly white, and the nearest city with a significant Somali population is in London. And finally, a broader group of Somali and Somali diaspora communities online who are engaged using social media. So I want to emphasize at this point that the project was built on previous collaborations that the team had been doing, and that there are networks of people today who have made this work possible, just as there were networks of people who made the initial collections possible. So at the same time as doing this project, the museum was working on several strands of their Reimagining the Museum project, and I was able to work with colleagues within and outside the museum, individual collaborators from the museum's network, and other organisations to achieve the aims of the project. One of the most important collaborations has been with Faiz Mohammed Shi, who is a member of the Somali Bajuni diaspora community living in Kenya. So Diana Powell-Cotton took around 100 photographs in the Bajuni Islands, which are off the south coast of Somalia. And a few of these had been digitised and shared as part of a collaborative project with the British Museum in their Object Journeys programme. The photographs that were online had started to circulate on social media, and they reached Faiz, who recognised relatives in some of the photographs and left a comment on the British Museum site, and then subsequently contacted the Powell-Cotton Museum. The museum were understandably keen to work with him, but they lacked the capacity to do dedicated digitisation and research on the photographs, which is something that this project allowed us the opportunity to do. So I digitised all of the Bajuni photographs and shared them with Faiz, along with the records that I had put together, matching up the dates of the photographs with Diana's diaries. And he worked with his uncles, Said Omar Malim, Yusuf Omar Malim, and Arabia Bakari, who were putting together a genealogy of the Bajuni Islands. And they were able to identify several more of the individuals in the images. Through another collaborator, Abira Hussein, we had the opportunity to display some of the photographs at the Barbican Library in a co-curated display. And this was a fantastic opportunity to get the collections to a wider audience. And of course, all of the research that went into the display was then added to the collection's records to ensure a lasting legacy for this collaboration. For the second intended audience, I worked again with Abira Hussein and ran a workshop with Women's Inclusive Team, a charity in Tower Hamlets led by Sophia Jama, who is standing next to me in this photo. For the workshop, I created surrogate copies of the photograph albums, some of which I left with the group, and I tested ways of sharing the images online with them. So it was a mixed age group of Somali women, and we talked about what interested them about the photographs, how they would go about searching for material about Somali history online. so that I could make sure that I was using words and themes in my catalogue descriptions that aligned with their interests. And this also fed into a webpage which we created for the Somali photographs on the museum website, which I did with the help of Lindsay Ridley at the museum. So finally, I shared the newly digitized photographs on Instagram and on WhatsApp, and you can scan the QR code on screen to access the Instagram account. So we did experiment with using WhatsApp because that's the most used platform among the audience we were trying to reach. And ultimately, that was an experiment that wasn't a success, but the Instagram account realized over 200 followers who were mostly young Somali and Somali diaspora people, which was evidenced in their profiles of lots of Somali flags, and people sent a lot of DMs from these young people saying how much they appreciated being able to see this heritage online. So that was really gratifying. But I also used the Instagram captions and feedback that I got from these messages and the Instagram analytics to hone the descriptions of the images I was writing in the records. And I was able to update the captions as more information came to light. And the social media element of the project also enabled me to connect with Somali curators in Mogadishu and in Stockholm and Minneapolis. So I focused on the way that I used different forms of engagement to continually add to and improve the catalogue records that I was working on for the photographs. But in essence, this has been a collections documentation project. With the help of Ben McLaughlin, the documentation assistant at the museum, I digitised over 800 photographs in total. And I worked with Inbal and archivist Hazel to create a system for accessioning the photographs and for recording information about people. So this has created a foundation for better documentation. There are now high-res shareable digital assets, and thanks to the social media, there's greater awareness of the collections. So I hope that all of this work will enable the museum to continue to build on the collaborations and new connections I've been able to make to share the collections even more widely. And I wanted to end by sharing one of the stories from Faiz's research. The photograph on this slide is of Dakia Washali, who Faiz's uncles were immediately able to recognise and identify as a well-known poet and singer from Chove Island, which is the island that they originally come from. And they were able to share stories about her and even a song that she was known for. But before any of this work, this photograph was simply captioned in Diana's album with the Italian word for Bajuni and was listed as a Bajuni woman. So it's really been an amazing opportunity to bring the personalities and the lives back to the people in these photos.
Thank you, Kathleen, and everyone at Powell-Cotton. I know there's a few of you in the audience as well. You're very welcome. So next up, we're going to hear from Catherine Malcolm, who is the collections curator at Sainsbury Centre, about the Gatsby cataloguing project. And rather than slides, Catherine is going to guide me through the website. So yes, Catherine, guide away.
Okay, thanks so much, Sarah. Hi, I'm Catherine Malcolm, and I'm a collections curator here at the Sainsbury Centre. We're delighted to be here for the awards presentation, so thank you so much for inviting us. I'll give a little introduction of who we are. We're an international art museum and sculpture park, home to a world-class collection of art collected by Robert and Lisa Sainsbury, who began building their art collection in the 1930s. And we're located on the campus of the University of East Anglia in Norwich. And we're one of the most prominent university art galleries in Britain and a major national centre for the study and presentation of art. Robert and Lisa Sainsbury rapidly became two of the UK's leading patrons of the arts and were champions of new artists. And in 1973, they gifted the University of East Anglia their collection of several hundred paintings, drawings and sculptures from all around the world. And they commissioned a then relatively unknown Norman Foster to design the new building to house the collection. And that's what you can see here on our website homepage. And the Gatsby Foundation has helped fund the construction of this revolutionary new centre, which opened in 1978. And they've supported its activities, which include exhibitions, artist residencies, conservation projects, and programmes with local schools ever since. And that includes our cataloguing project, which we've submitted to the Trust Award today. Our cataloguing project began in 2020, and its aim was to take a fresh examination of the Sainsbury Centre collection and create an innovative facility to encourage and promote ongoing research into one of the most important collections in the UK after the national holdings. Its focus was to provide an opportunity to optimise the online presentation of the catalogue via the Centre's website and to produce a comprehensive public online catalogue with new photography, which offers users enhanced search capabilities and navigation across our website towards the collection. So this is on our website now, our public catalogue. And the banner image behind there is our living area, which is our permanent display area in the museum. Just to say, our core project team consisted of 4 members of staff, and this is Calvin Winner, Head of Collections, who was our project leader, who did the progression of the project. Joanna Roberts, who was our previous senior registrar, who took a supervisory role over the database. And myself and our other colleague, Tom Haley, who were hired specifically for the project. As art curator, I managed the cataloguers and written content and multimedia content and interpretation. And as digital officer, Tom managed the Axial database developments and coordination with our software developers and new photography. We wanted to develop a dynamic new facility that we could build upon to optimize our collections management practices and to facilitate future collections management projects, and integrating a standardized data terminology and format. And we wanted our public catalogue to not look like a database. We wanted it to be more intuitive for our users and give a better experience for the general public, as well as specialist academic researchers. The key to creating our catalogue was building a powerful search engine to begin with. And for this, we work closely with the media company Culture Shock, who are specialists in developing and managing online content across the arts and culture sector. And we collaborated to develop a platform that enhanced the search functionality of the website to optimize search results and produce cross-cultural search tools to help users explore the diverse nature of our collection. And alongside this, our internal collection Axial database was also upgraded to bring it up to industry standard. If you click on the first of the 3 on the left, we can see there's a range of cross-cultural themes. So we picked a number of terms here that we wanted to be able to offer audiences who may not know what objects they particularly wanted to look for in the collection, but could, really, it was to sort of focus across the whole collection under these cross-cultural themes as a starting point to their search. So that was one example of how you might navigate the collection. In the centre there, that blue box, we have searching by object type, and these terms relate to the type of art and material culture we have in the collection. And on the right, again, we wanted to offer starting point of looking at different regions of the world. And again, these terms relate very much to what we have in the collection. And at the top there, further up, you would have seen we've got a general search the collection. We want a really nice big search bar so that people felt you can type in any term or an object number if you were more specifically had a knowledge of object numbers within the collection. But it works in a very general way. We feel that we've offered a lot of different tools there by which to have a look through and find what you're looking for. Click in 1013. I just wanted to take you to some of the examples of our catalogue entries. And if you click on the first one there, the bowl, first of all, this is examples. We've got new photography of all our objects. In some cases, we've got more than one image. And again, scrolling down, we were looking at all the core data that we wanted to produce. So on the right-hand side, we really wanted to have updated and standardized core data formulated to the right of the page, which then allowed us to be less dry in our descriptions on the left-hand side there, and to hook in and engage our users with the most interesting things that we could say about each object. And we used personal cataloguing descriptions relating to stories of provenance in the context of the Sainsbury's as well, and their support of contemporary artists and the relationships between them to give a sense of the story of who we were and how these objects came to be in our collection. We had to digitize a lot of data and provenance information from all sorts of different places and archives, within the centre and to centralise that digitally into one accessible space before we could even begin cataloguing. We were determined to offer a diversification of voice across our entries. So again, if you just scroll down a little there, at the bottom of our descriptions, this is a standard format now. We have the author of the description and the date it was written, and these are referenced entries. So we've provided hyperlinks just to give, you know, an option to people who do want to have a look and research things further. We've got multimedia links there, and again, further reading for those audience members who want to investigate further, but it's just optional. And scrolling down a little bit more there, for a number of our catalogue entries, we really wanted to produce, you know, associated videos of artists giving talks about their work, where we could source them, just to, again, to give another access point to people who may not want to read paragraphs of text, but rather watch and listen to video about the artist talking about their own work. So we've managed to do that with a number of our entries, and it'd be lovely to be able to continue to do that further. I just want to share a couple of other examples of different content that we produced. If you don't mind just typing in 181. So this is a beautiful musical instrument, Maori flute from New Zealand. And this entry in particular, just wanted to bring up, if you don't mind scrolling down, just to show that actually this author was actually one of our interns, who we also invited, you know, some of our MA and PhD students to produce catalogue entries for us. And beneath the text there, if you just scroll a little further, we also really wanted to provide provenance details where we could. We really wanted to be open about our provenance and how things came to be at the centre. And through research and through looking through our archives, we were able to embed a link to a sound recording of this flute being played at the centre back in 2016. This is by Alistair Fraser, who did a tour of UK museums playing all different sorts of Maori instruments. So it's lovely to be able to give more context. We really wanted to provide, you know, thorough context to sort of bring these objects to, you know, alive to people, whether they were, you know, if you're searching the collections from home or for school projects and study. Another example, just going back to that tab again, arts and objects, it's object number 31571. And this is a mobile by Kenneth Martin. And again, this is a kinetic work. And although we've got a range of images there, at the bottom of the entry, it doesn't have any sound, but we wanted to be able to show kinetic works in motion, just again, to give a sense of what you'd see in the gallery if this object was on display, just really providing more context, going beyond just, you know, dry text of cataloguing to, yeah, just to engage visitors on a much deeper level. And similarly, with another object, we could go to 273. I'm just giving a range of different types of multimedia content that we've really pushed to include in our cataloguing records here. So 273 is a snuff dispensing spoon from South Africa. And just at the bottom there, we've tried to provide links to other parts of our website as well. So we had a story, this is an artist, Sethambile Mazani, who did an artist residency with us last year here. And this is a story that's on another part of our website, but we wanted to make more links between our departments and the programs going on. And again, just to give other stories and alternative perspectives of objects where we could. And I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for letting us talk about our project.
Thank you, Catherine. So our next presentation is from Colin Gale, and this is on behalf of Bethlem Museum of the Mind. And Colin is going to be prompting me through his slides.
Thank you. Yes, as I said, my name is Colin Gale. I'm the director of Bethlem Museum of the Mind, which is embedded within Bethlem Royal Hospital, the oldest psychiatric institution in the world, and to this day, the deliverer of mental health services on that site. And we're honoured to be in the running for the Collections Trust Award on the strength of a project we undertook in 2022 to strengthen the cataloguing of a collection of artworks in the museum's holdings on the basis of improved cultural and religious literacy on our part. These works of art were produced by patients of Bangalore Mental Hospital in India in the mid-20th century, some of them within art therapy classes, we think, others not. And the fact that they're part of our collections here in London reflects the contours of colonial and post-colonial psychiatry. Documentary evidence of the provenance of these artworks doesn't exist, but here is what we do know. In the 1930s, two psychiatrists at Bethlem's sister hospital, the Maudsley, Doctors Gutman and Maclay, began to develop research interests in the artistic output of psychiatric patients in the UK and abroad. Over 2 or 3 decades, Gutman died in 1948 and Maclay in 1964, they brought together a collection of so-called psychiatric art, which they attempted to classify according to patient diagnosis. Their collecting interests became widely known, not only through the Maudsley Hospital, but also abroad, due to the major role played by the Maudsley and its doctors through the middle decades of the century in the training of psychiatrists throughout the British Empire, as was. Dr. Govinda Swami was one of many Maudsley-trained doctors who learnt Western biological psychiatry in London and took it home. For him, home was Bangalore Mental Hospital, later renamed the National Institute of Mental Health and Neuroscience, or NIMHANS, just as Bangalore was renamed Bengaluru in the post-colonial era. Govinda Swami was formidable as a clinician, a visionary, an intellectual, and an organizer. And in the 1950s, it was said that Bangalore Mental Hospital owed its foundation and its ongoing existence to him personally. And this is how Govinda Swami was depicted by a patient of the hospital at the time. This picture is one of about 25 within the collections of Bethlem Museum of the Mind, produced by a number of patients of Bangalore Mental Hospital in the late 1950s. We don't know for sure, but it's a fair assumption that Govinda Swami knew Dr. Maclay personally from his time as a student in London, or at any rate, he must have known of his art collecting interests by reputation, thanks to that informal worldwide Maudsley alumni network. A fair assumption too that he thought it appropriate to make a gift of these pictures to his collection, and no evidence that the artists themselves were consulted. Following the death of Maclay, the Gutman-Maclay collection of psychiatric art, comprising several hundred items in total, was administered by trustees until the mid-1980s, and on the winding up of that trust was then transferred to Bethlem Museum of the Mind. An outline catalogue was made of the works, but most of the collection remained unexamined in boxes until comparatively recently. In 2019, the museum was privileged to have a museum curator named Amrutha Rangagowda on a 2-week British Council-funded placement. Amrutha came to us from NIMHANS, where she had been responsible for the development of museum displays on the history of the hospital and the institute. Her attention was drawn to the collections of artworks from Bangalore, and she worked alongside my colleague Rebecca Raybone to define and delineate a project to refresh their cataloguing, because their catalogue descriptions desperately needed refreshing. The next thing that happened, of course, was COVID, and so it took until 2022 to recruit someone to undertake this project of refreshing the ways these works were catalogued in order to reflect greater cultural and religious sensitivity. That someone was Donata Miller, a student at the New Museum School, a museum training initiative of the University of Leicester aimed at diversifying the demographically homogenous UK museum workforce. Donata brought passion and pizzazz to this project, but was also extremely thoughtful and collaborative in the way she went about it. Two key collaborators were Dr. Vishal Basvar from the Institute of Psychiatry there on the left, and Bethlem Hospital's own Dr. Velsraj Koravangatu. Both of them were instrumental in helping us recognize many of the religious and cultural references embedded within the pictures, and their insights were captured in a report written by Donata, which was used to overhaul our catalogue descriptions. To give just 2 examples, The picture on the left-hand side of this slide was described upon entry into the museum's collections as being that of a snake charmer, and was further described prosaically as a figure with closed eyes and a snake wound around the neck. A circular emblem on the head appears to have had water pouring down from it. Well, thanks to our project, we now know that the cataloguer did not have the kind of cultural capital required to recognize this as a depiction of the Hindu god Lord Shiva. And then the picture on the right-hand side of the slide was described originally as Panlay's Biscuits Factory, being a building comprised of different coloured squares with doors along the middle of the building and a chimney on the top. A particularly unimaginative way of describing one of the most iconic industrial buildings of Mumbai, which for 87 years produced one of India's favourite brands of biscuit, not Panlay's but Powell-Cotton biscuits, as well known there as custard creams or bourbons are here. The cataloguing refresh is practically complete now, but of course the dream is to give these pictures their time in the sunlight, or in carefully controlled light conditions anyway, not in boxes but on display, and for the enhanced cultural awareness now contained within the cataloguing to lead to exhibitions that promote and enhance cultural understanding. That's the difference, or it's one difference anyway, that good cataloguing can make. We're already committed to such an exhibition here at Bethlem Museum of the Mind. All the pictures are now mounted and ready to be framed, and we have dates in the diary for their display later this year. Were we to be winners of the award, this would enable us to build an engaging museum events programming featuring Donata, Miller, and a number of our other collaborators talking about the project and talking more broadly about the light these pictures shed on colonial and post-colonial psychiatry, society, and culture on the Indian subcontinent. And the next step we'd want to take is to start talking to Amrutha and other colleagues to see what options may exist to take the pictures to Bengaluru itself, nearly 70 years after they were produced. Like the other shortlisted museums, we're all on the edge of our seat with our fingers and toes crossed, but we're also grateful for the opportunity this award and the event gives us to promote our work and also learn about the experiences of others. I don't know about anyone else, but later I'm going onto the Sainsbury Centre website and listen to that recording of the Maori instrument being played. Thank you so much for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you, Colin. And thank you to all of our presenters presenting on behalf of our 4 shortlisted museums. So we're now on to the exciting part. I'm going to hand over to Louise again, who's going to talk us through our announcement of the winner.
Wow, I was blown away with all of those, honestly, even when I read them, but seeing your presentations, I take my hat off to everybody involved, amazing. We have a winner, but we have also got 3 highly commended projects as well, because they're just too good not to be highly commended. So on behalf of the Collections Trust, this year's 2022 award is going to the Powell-Cotton Museum for their Museum Makers People-Centered Cataloguing. And yes, a round of applause, I think. And obviously the highly commended projects do also need a mention. We've got the Old Reiki Retold by Museums and Galleries Edinburgh, the Gatsby Cataloguing Project at Sainsbury Centre, and the relationships and research establishing the provenance and the context of India asylum art at Bethlem Museum of the Mind. Again, a round of applause for all of them. Amazing. So we want to sort of explain why we picked the Powell-Cotton Museum. So the winning entry to the trustees and the judging panel has clearly shown how rethinking cataloguing has demonstrated a more inclusive approach by opening up and enhancing collections information based on user needs. It has ultimately uncovered fascinating new perspectives from the collection, as well as bringing together the Somali and the Bajuni diaspora audiences from around the world. And these are the people who are associated with the collection, worked with the Powell-Cottons, but never had their stories told until now. They have contributed their knowledge to improving the museum's records and ensuring that images of the community are respectfully recorded. And additionally, the momentum the project has created, along with its social media outreach, means that more collaborators are coming forward to provide further insight. So I'd love to just hand over to Kathleen to maybe explain how you feel and what you would like to do with the award money.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, very much. I just want to say a couple of things, but then I'm actually going to hand over to Nicola Stiliani, who is now the head of collections at the Powell-Cotton Museum. And during my presentation, I tried hard to name check everyone who was involved in the project. So I won't repeat everyone's names in the thank yous now, but it has been an incredible project, and those elements of collaboration have been what's made it so pleasurable for me. And I just wanted to reflect that I think that in museums, often we are working with imperfect systems, whether that's our cataloguing systems or the funding systems, which we're working with. And I was extremely lucky to be able to get the Headley Fellowship funding to work on this project. And I was able to use some of the funding from that to pay some of my collaborators. But of course, I wouldn't say that the balance of resources was right there, because this kind of work really does require a lot of different people with a lot of different skills. And I think it's important for all of us to be planning that into our projects and to be advocating to our funders to support that kind of work. So as I said, I tried to thank everyone. I actually didn't mention Nicola, who came into the museum towards the end of my project, and she has been fantastic in taking on board some of the work that I've been doing, and I know she's really enthusiastic to take it forward. So I'm going to hand over to Nicola to talk about how the museum's going to use the prize.
Thank you, Kathleen, and congratulations again. Just such fantastic work and with the museum are absolutely delighted, and I will let name checked know that they were properly name checked, because unfortunately they couldn't all be here. The museum is going to use the money to continue the work with both Abira Hussein, and that represents our ongoing commitment to working with members of descendant communities both here in the UK and in Africa and across the globe. We'll be exploring more members of the Somali diaspora, Kenya, and recording the stories of some of the people who have work, Fires and his uncles, because the things that Kathleen points out in her guidance for the sector is to make sure we have accurate information, people who provide us with information, and the logging work. So that's what we'll be doing with the money. And we do hope to continue to seek funding to work with this extraordinary collection of photographs and also the objects associated with it. I also want to say that the exhibition that was initially held at the Barbican is now available to see at our museum. Visit us, please. It's in the glass corridor when you come into the museum, and I think it's really helping us set the tone for all the wider ambitions that Kathleen alluded to in terms of telling other people's stories. So it's fantastic for us. We've already printed out our certificate, and that will be going on the wall with the display first thing tomorrow, now that we're allowed to tell people. It means a huge amount to win this award, particularly given the straight countries. It was absolutely fantastic projects, and yes, many visits and websites planned on the back of it. Yeah, so thank you again, and thank you to Inbal Livni, who really was the head of collections that deserved to be receiving this award. I very much interloped in right at the end.
Great, thank you, Nicola. And you will actually be getting a proper certificate in the post. So I know you said you printed it off, but there will be one coming to our winners and all of our highly commended as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola, and to Kathleen as well, and to all of our presenters and our audience as well. Thank you so much for joining us. And also thank you to Louise for co-hosting so ably with me as well. I appreciate it. So another round of applause for everyone, and thank you all for joining us. And we finished just on time.
Congratulations.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.